mask or? Okay.
So you feel like you need to mad professor desk?
Yeah, exactly. It's like, I want to take notes here.
I know.
I'm good. I'm just trying to make sure everybody's talking to you, right?
Because I probably just told you Clint.
I feel bad when I talk about it. Okay, this board will be a little different today.
That's fine. Okay, you guys okay? Ready?
Yeah, you bet.
No choice. Sorry.
Ready, set, go.
Last thing is spit water.
All right. My name is David Bowman. I have the pleasure of serving as the student body president for LSU Baton Rouge Graduate School, Vet School, and Law School of this year.
I'm Abby Grace Milligan. I serve as the student body vice president.
All right. So we're both going to be moderating this panel. Joining us today, we have Brianna Bourgeois, who is an LSU Health Sciences New Orleans MD and PhD candidate. We have Abby Baines, Dr. Abby Baines, who is the Vice Chancellor at LSU for Student Services. We have Destiny Harris, who is a student at LSU Alexandria. We have Dr. Kim Williams, who is an instructor of construction management and online programs coordinator. Then we have Grace Simones, instructor of mathematics at LSU E, liaison to LSU A. And then we have Dr. Clint Wilson here with us in person, who is a professor of civil and environmental engineering. So Dr. Droegemeier, you can just start off with like some opening comments or, just open it up for us.
Sure. Well, let me just begin by thanking all of you for making time to chat today. I really do appreciate it. Those of you joining remotely, it's an honor to be here. I've been having a great visit so far. I had a great visit with student government with Javen just a minute ago, and Abby Grace. It was really a wonderful discussion. Met with the faculty senate and staff senates this morning. So just really appreciate you all taking time out of your day. I know it's finals week and it's a busy time. Actually, at OU, it's our last week of class, so I've got somebody teaching my class for me, and I'll be back for finals next week, so I couldn't get out of that. But anyway, I'm happy to talk about myself just a little bit if you want to hear that, or we can just jump right into questions. Whatever, David, however you want to proceed, I'll leave it up to you. If we maximize the time for questions, probably, you think, or?
Yeah, we can if you want to just hop right into the questions.
Okay, sure, let's do it. Yeah, thank you.
All right, we'll start off with Brianna Bourgeois. I'm sorry for saying your name incorrectly. Brianna or Brianna? She's not. Okay, we'll start off with Dr. Baines.
Good morning. Good to spend some time with you.
Good morning.
My question is, there are times in student affairs where the division of that part of the university can be looked at by some stakeholders as secondary to the primary mission, maybe looked at as just the fun side of things, even by our faculty partners. So how do you respond to that perception and ensure that this critical area continues to be the integral part of a holistic education?
No, great. It's a wonderful question. We are here because of students. University wouldn't be a university without students, faculty, and staff. But at the end of the day, you take students out of the equation, you don't have a university. I've been a professor for 36 years, and I stay in academia, and I love academia because of the students, the creative energy, the talents they have, the ideas they bring forward. And so we are here to help students in every way, help them grow intellectually. We're here to help them grow culturally, help them grow in research and creative activity, whether it's fine arts and humanities, whatever their areas are. Certainly in student government, growing their leadership skills, student athletes the same way. So student affairs, student services are critically important to all of those things. And to me, it's really the foundation of why we're here. And we need to make sure that we have the proper resources, the proper structures in place. We understand, of course, some of the challenges students face today are quite different than even a few years ago. Vastly different than when I was a student, but even, I've been in the classroom for 36 years and working with grad students and so on. I find a lot of differences and a lot of interesting challenges. Our students today are faced with unbelievable challenges, more so than ever before. And so, as I said in previous meetings, and I say this with a little bit of twinkle in my eye, when parents drop their students off, their family members, their children, to a university, they entrust them to our care. And that's an incredible responsibility on our part. It's an amazing opportunity for us to help as part of the LSU family, to help them grow. But at the end of the day, we have precious cargo aboard this ship we call LSU, and we have to make certain that we are doing everything in our power to protect those students, to keep them safe, to help them grow, to challenge them, and to help them also learn to make sure that they respect one another, that we debate with civility, with rigor, we debate intellectually, we work together to solve problems, and that we're all part of the big family. Student affairs is absolutely the center of the universe in my mind in those things. And what would we do without student affairs? So whether it's counseling, whether it's guidance, whether it's dealing with challenges when a student doesn't show up to a class for a month and you're wondering what's going on with them, all of those services are extremely important, and they're evolving with time. They're not static at all. The challenges keep changing, and student affairs has to evolve to meet those challenges. So I hope that I got to your question there, if that's helpful.
Yes, thank you so much.
All right. I heard that Brianna is on there now.
Yes, apologies for issues before. My bad. So my question for you is, while research is conducted at multiple LSU campuses, it's often difficult to collaborate with students and faculty at a campus other than your own. How do you envision increasing collaborations within the LSU system that can benefit students?
Oh, thank you. That's a great question. And let me say that there are many things that attract me to LSU, but one of the foremost is the fact that you have a very diverse system across all the institutions that are part of the LSU family. You have the laboratory school, a K-12 school right on the campus here in Baton Rouge. You have 2-year, you have 4-year, you have Alexandria, you have Eunice, you have Shreveport. Then you have 2 medical campuses, you have the Ag Center, you have Pennington, you have all this array of amazing things, but yet it is not connected as it should be, nearly as much as it should be. In fact, you at LSU can be the absolute national role model, I would say, for a seamless education framework, all the way from early childhood, pre-K, all the way through lifelong learning. And so this is something that really, really attracts me here. And I think that there's so much opportunity there. And frankly, we were talking about this yesterday, that sometimes it's easier to collaborate with people in another state or another institution than it is people, 30 miles down the road. And that simply can't be the case. And I think there's a lot of fear sometimes in that, well, if we sort of, work more closely together, we're going to lose our identity or we're going to lose our resources. One of the beauties of the LSU system is every campus has its own distinct identity, and you definitely don't want to mess that up. You want to preserve that. That's so valuable, but it doesn't mean that working together, somebody's going to come and steal your resources. And that involves trust, it involves institutional culture, it involves also some sort of mechanical things about working together that need to be addressed. And so I've talked a lot with folks about this. And in my own university, our Norman campus, the main campus, and then the Health Sciences Center campus, faculty that wanted to collaborate with each other on grants had to, believe this or not, we're all part of the same university, had to do a subcontract. They couldn't just include them as a co-PI. It was ridiculous. And so we finally just got rid of that crazy thing. And there was some state laws that had to be, that were involved with that. So ultimately, though, it's a culture, right? It's a culture of being part of the family where you're focused on the growth of your institution, but at the end of the day, you're focused on the growth of LSU broadly. You're focused on what it means for the citizens of the state, for the nation and the world. And seeing that in context, I think will help people see, okay, I can still promote my campus. I can still do the things that I want to do. We can still grow LSU Shreveport. We can still grow LSU Eunice. but we don't have to be so protective that we are fearful of collaborating with the folks in our own institution. If it's easier to collaborate with somebody at another university, we're really doing something wrong. So that is one of the highest priority things for me, is to come in and really help weave together that fabric in a way that truly is a role model for the nation. Including, I should say, including students. I include students in that all the way around. Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next, Destiny Harrison. Okay.
Hi. So with the dynamic landscape of how school will be delivered, we have Zoom, we have hybrid, and we have in-person classes in the near future. What are 2 ideas do you plan to implement that will keep students involved and supported throughout these changes?
I missed the last part. I'm sorry. I didn't quite understand. You said what, could you just repeat that last part there?
What are 2 ideas you plan to implement that will keep students involved and supported through these changes?
Oh, I see. Okay, gotcha. Well, I think the various learning modalities are really terrific. They each have their own strengths and weaknesses. You know, fundamentally though, we are creatures of interaction. We were created to do life together, to physically interact with one another. And I think you can do a lot through remote learning and so on and so forth, teleworking and so on. But at the end of the day, I think that campus residential learning experience is so incredibly important. I used to teach online back in the days of black and white TV where things didn't work. And I was teaching people at University of Puerto Rico at Mayagüez. I was teaching people at Mississippi State. We had a class we were doing in weather, and it was absolute pain. It's much better now, but still the challenges of interaction remain. And I also have developed a completely online course called Demystifying the Academic Research Enterprise. It helps students and early career scholars understand all the aspects of research, and it's a completely online course. So there are a variety of things that I think we can do. And I know LSU Online is quite successful. There are a number of degree programs online, many courses online, different campuses do that. I think the thing is, one of the beauties of online is it increases accessibility, and it helps sort of, kind of flatten the landscape or democratize learning to where folks who traditionally would not have access to these resources that have access to them. And the same is true for telehealth. So there's all kinds of things. But really, to be effective in distance learning, it can't just be a videotape of somebody standing in front of a blackboard, right? There are ways to do instruction by distance learning that are different than just simply in person in the classroom. And somebody once said that if you got like a big theater style classroom, if you're in the 10th row or beyond, you're actually doing distance learning, right? I mean, so we have to really think about what it means to do that. So one thing I would say is, taking to your question, the first thing is, let's take stock of our digital learning environment, really understanding, are we doing it in the best way? And what I've seen is really fabulous. And really look at making sure that we are reaching populations that otherwise would not be reachable. Okay, that's the first thing. The second thing I would do is to say, think about not only just in terms of degree programs, but also reskilling and upskilling folks who maybe have degrees or credentials with a little bit of additional learning that can be done online, which will accommodate their schedules or whatever. You can take them to a whole socioeconomic level if you look at not just what degree do they have, but what skills do they have. This is especially important in rural communities and disadvantaged communities where you're giving them additional skills. They don't necessarily need a degree. It might be a certificate or whatever. And those are very, very effectively delivered online. Is that a focus? I don't know personally. I haven't talked enough to the online folks to know, but I think it's a very, very powerful tool, but not to replace the residential in-person learning experience, but as a very important supplement to it.
Thank you.
Thank you for the question.
Now we hear from Dr. Kim Williams.
Good morning. Thanks for joining us this morning. So I actually was going to ask a question related to online learning because that's one of my areas of expertise, but you dove right into it. So
Okay.
The question that I'm going to ask you next is, what type of institutional policies as it relates to mental health and wellness do you propose to ensure that the LSU community is supported through environmental stressors like a global pandemic and social injustice?
Yeah. No, thank you for that question. It kind of goes back to the first question about student services, the totality of what we need to help students. As you say, the stresses are very, very different today. The pandemic, my goodness, are we harvesting the lessons learned from the pandemic to say, okay, we know we can do better. Let's not just try to get through the pandemic. Going through that valley is tough, but when we get back to the mountaintop, we want to make sure that that valley experience is something that we really leverage and we learn from. So harvesting those experiences, making sure that we're adequately resourcing these areas. Because again, taking care of students is job one. They are why we're here. And are we working, for example, with the medical campuses? Are we fully leveraging the capabilities there that we have in our own system to provide the mental health support and meeting the other needs of the students? Sometimes it might be necessary to engage external interests apart from the LSU family. But I think looking inside and seeing if we have the resources there that we can leverage, very, very important, counseling services and so on. I know there's a kind of a behavioral intervention function here, much like we have at my university, where if you detect a problem with a student, a challenge that they're going through, you can get them help before it becomes a really full-blown crisis in their lives. And I've seen so many cases, this is actually, to me, some of the most fulfilling things that I've ever done as a professor, where you can help a student, not in the classroom so much, but you help them outside the classroom, and that enables them to do all the other things that are important, including in the classroom. That fulfills me beyond what I could ever express. And fortunately, there haven't been too many of those, but when they have come, it's just such an incredibly wonderful feeling to know that you help somebody through a rough spot in their life. And I've had a few of those, and my goodness, but they're much more numerous these days. So mental health and well-being are important. And I think we also have to make sure that people aren't stigmatized by that, and that people realize these are serious, real issues. Okay, some people still dismiss that, oh, just tough it out or whatever. No, we have come a long way in society. We're not there yet to the end point, but we need to make sure that people recognize these as bona fide challenges and take them seriously, and that people are not stigmatized.
Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
And next we'll hear from Grace Simonis. Sorry if I pronounced that wrong.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Okay, so this is a two-part question. The LSUE at LSUA collaboration has been very successful in assisting students to complete one or more developmental courses and proceed to a four-year institution. The first part of the question is, do you support this program and foresee its continuation on the LSUA campus? And if so, what are some ways you can further integrate the two campuses to help the LSUE faculty and students on the Alexandria campus feel less isolated and more included?
Mm-hmm. Great question. Thank you. And as you heard earlier, this is one of the things that is so beautiful about the LSU system. And frankly, these sort of transition points between 2-year and 4-year, I think that's one of the toughest things that we deal with in America more broadly. And part of the reason is I think that some universities that take students from a community college, a 2-year college, they find out they're not adequately prepared. And so it causes them to have a rather negative view of a two-year college, because while these students that are coming in, they're matriculating, but they're not really well prepared. So we have to do a lot of remediation. I think the first thing is I absolutely support this. And I think, again, the uniqueness of either LSUE to LSUA or LSUA to the A&M campus, or whatever the transition points are. I think again, articulation agreements are great, but that's not the end of the story. Okay, the end of the story is working together in a holistic framework and supporting one another, and not saying, you're sending us students that are unprepared, I don't want to work with you. It's like, okay, that may be the case. How do we work together to fix that? How do we work together to address those issues? So yes, I absolutely support that. I think that weaving together that sort of connective tissue across the campus is to me one of the greatest opportunities there. So how do you actually integrate them? Well, there's sort of a couple of ways to think of that. I think one is, are there mechanistic kinds of things? Are there policies? Are there processes that need to change that are maybe have been around for a long time and they've outlived their useful purpose or whatever? But the other one is tougher, and it's one of culture. And it's one of institutions trusting one another and saying, we can have our own institutional personalities. We can continue to be who we are. That's a beauty of the system. But working together doesn't mean that we have to forsake our personality as an institution, or there are resources that somehow get taken away and given to some other part of the system. And that is a real big challenge. And that fear factor is there. And that lack of trust, I think, is just human nature. And so I'm not in any way suggesting that is deeply part of the culture here because I don't know. I've got to become more informed about the culture. But I can just tell you other systems that I'm aware of that aren't the unique structure that LSU has have those problems. And I've found in my life that universities are kind of the same everywhere, so I'm assuming that some of those challenges exist here. But I think those are among the biggest opportunities for this system to really help the transition of individuals across what are typically very difficult boundaries in our education enterprise nationally.
Thank you.
Ready? Okay. Yes, so again, I'm Clint Wilson, professor in civil environmental engineering.
Right.
I'm going to talk a little bit or ask you a question around a recent National Academy report, or I say recent, 2018, I think it is, called Branches of the Same Tree. And it was integrating arts and into arts humanities with STEM fields, including medicine, right? And they points to evidence associating positive learning outcomes, help students enter the workforce, live enriched lives, become active, informed members of the modern democracy. And I think each of the campuses, in the LSU system have an honors program of some type, right? And an honors experience. And so I think you kind of argue those students, that's kind of probably a lot of what they get, right? It's like critical thinking and that. But as we think about the broader population of students, we've been in the classroom a long time, and you realize you're not teaching. You got to realize you want to reach as many of the students as you can. So perhaps you can speak a little bit about with pressure for retention, pressure time to graduation, right? All these other in curricular issues. How do you maybe see pulling those ideas or those into more of a general education or into the curriculum for the general student population? Right.
No, that's a really great question. That is a good report. In the world of research, in the sort of the physical and medical sciences, there's this term called convergence, right? The convergent research. Yeah. So this is really more the notion of convergence on the learning side, on the more, and not to say that research isn't learning, but more on the sort of the instructional side. I think that the thing is, a general education curriculum is really trying to create students that are rounded in all aspects. So we're really training students and educating them not to just go out and get a job in a particular field. We are certainly doing that, but we're also educating them to be productive, responsible, civically engaged citizens of the nation and the world especially. So the skills they need to do that are very broad. And so whether it's you say there's STEM, but then there's also STEAM and bringing in these other areas, right? And one of the things that I think that we can do, and I don't know if it can become a requirement because everybody wants something to be a requirement, but I think certainly in encouraging students when they come into the institution, and perhaps even in co-curricular activities while they're in high school, to really explore a lot of these other areas. Okay, I want to be a physician, or I want to be, a meteorologist or whatever. I'm going to take a course in art history and in world literature. Some of that may be required, but it's like really helping people understand that this is the last time in your life when, and although we're creating lifelong learners and you can get a lot of that on your own, but to learn from a scholarly expert in those areas, now's the time to really avail yourself of that. And so this is, I think, where advising, where an institutional culture is such that you don't just come in and take all the sort of the core courses, but we want you to be well-rounded. So the general education curriculum sort of does that, but I think advising and encouraging students to be able to, to take some of these other courses to round out their views that are maybe completely different than what their chosen field of scholarship is going to be. And so how that actually plays out, I think whether it's a requirement or whatever, I think we ought to have a conversation about that. But I really strongly believe in that because I've seen the benefits of that play out in people's lives time and time again. And I think that report is spot on in terms of recommending that sort of thing. And we have so many silos in the academy, not the National Academy, but in academia. And, it's sometimes difficult. Like people say, well, why are you taking that? It has no relevance to your course. It has relevance to my not necessarily my intellectual pursuits, but my humanity, and sometimes people forget that. But a university is where all this wonderful stuff is there. So come in and soak it up. And so I'd love to have that conversation. I think it's really important, and how we actually make that happen in the institution is critical.
Okay, so I have the next question.
Mm-hmm.
In my opinion, there's been a brave lack of leadership at LSU this past few years, and especially this past year when it comes to truly advocating for students' wants and needs. So do you believe that you're going to be able to recognize what the needs and wants of students are above what maybe administration, the board, or LSU attorneys are pushing for?
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And the preceding session that we had, Abby Grace, we kind of talked about a little bit this for those of you who are on the screen there. I'm at a university because of the students. First and foremost, I love students. I love working with them, and I am all about engaging students. And I gave an example. I'm happy to repeat it here in the previous session. We're at the White House. I created a committee on the President's Council of Advisors in Science and Technology that involved undergraduate students, graduate students, early career, non-academic professionals, and postdocs. And this committee called the President's Council of Advisors in Science and Technology, PCAS, has always been really eminent people in industry and academia and so on. They're fabulous people. But it struck me as a professor that I said, I get there, what's wrong with this picture? We don't have the folks who own the future at the table. Those folks do, the ones that are on PCAS, but we need the creative energy and the talent and the insights and the views of the students, of the next generation who are up and coming. They've got to be at the table helping policy happen as it's happening, not just being the passive recipients of it. So my involvement with students has always been engaging them from day one. They're not the last mile, they're the first mile. They're why we're here. So understanding what students' issues are means hanging out with students, okay? And I can tell you that, people say, well, if you're a president, you can't do that. Yes, you can, okay? I mean, being at the White House, I had 16, 18 meetings a day, very, very long days, and I was able to hang out with a lot of people. I was going around the country, traveling, talking to people at universities, getting input, having those conversations. Doing it at the university system is going to be easier than that, I would tell you, but it's no less important. So for me, it's not just important to make the students a priority. It's important for me personally to hang out with students, work with student government very closely and continuously so that I'm not always counting on somebody to tell me the problems, but I'm aware of them because I'm one of them. The same is true for faculty. I'm a professor first and foremost. If I become president, I'm still a professor. I work with the faculty because I want to live in their world because that's where I'm from. I want to live in the student world because I was a student. I'm no longer a student, so I've lost a lot of perspective of what it means to be a student. The only way I can make sure that I have that is to work with them. That's not to say I don't trust the provost and the student affairs folks. Absolutely, they're fabulous people. But there's nothing like hanging out with folks and building a trust relationship. We talked about this, Abby Grace, in the previous session. There has to be a trust and a relationship developed so that when students bring things to you, they know that you're interested, that you are genuine, and that they can trust you to take it forward wherever it needs to go, or that you're actually out ahead of them saying, hey guys, I see something happening. I want student government to be aware of this. So well, thank you for telling me that, because from our perspective, we didn't see that coming. We've got to all work together. And I know that sounds very simplistic, but it's tough to do, but it's part of the answer to the question that she asked of how do we advocate, how do we make sure that we're in touch with the student needs, the student challenges, the student issues. The answer is all the folks that work with the students, including me, not excluding the president, day in and day out. That's why we're here. And that's very important to me.
All right. We'll circle back to you, Dr. Bain.
Great, thank you. I'm switching gears a little bit to funding. Higher ed funding has been in Louisiana and continues to be well below an adequate level to meet our needs for students. Our tuition and fees now makes up 70% of our total operating budget at most universities, 80% at LSUA. As universities have continued to place the burden of funding on the backs of our students, just to meet minimum operating levels, what is your approach to ensuring that our students receive quality education that they deserve without continuing to increase the cost to students?
Right, absolutely. The first and foremost question, right? I mean, they're really important imperatives. Title IX, huge imperative. Diversity, inclusion, huge imperative. Budgets, salaries, retention, right at the top, right? So as you say, it's a challenge for everyone, and the cuts here have been extraordinary. And I think the more that you show you can do more with less, the less you get. And we're running out of less. We're running out of less. And what happens is people get disenfranchised, they burn out because their hearts are to serve, they're doing a great job. And they won't stop doing that, but at the end of the day, it's not sustainable. It's not a sustainable model. So in the midst of all these cuts, I know there's been a lot of looking at measures to reduce costs, right? So the first thing you look at is, okay, are there maybe national purchasing programs that we can get involved with that will cut costs here and there, cut the E&G to where you've got more money to invest in students and so on. You've got to have the institution be accessible. If the tuition and fees costs keep going up, you're driving students away. There are a lot of Pell Grant students, there are a lot of other students. We absolutely cannot afford to do that. Afford meaning in terms of the state of Louisiana, the constituents that we serve, the students. So what's the answer? Well, you can raise revenue, you can raise tuition and fees. Oh, that's not what you want to do. One of the options here, and there are a lot of things that one can explore, is philanthropic giving. Philanthropy won't run the university, okay? It simply won't. And the state support, as it continues to diminish, and you're putting it on the backs of fixed cost increases and so on, and you're probably not going to get it from appropriations. And you're certainly not going to get it from appropriations telling the same story you've already told. So this is why I say we need a bold 25-year, quarter-century plan for the institution that is exciting, it's transformative, it engages the alumni and the donors as part of the planning process. Not where, hey, we've got a plan, come join us, will you fund this or will you fund that? It's got to be baked into their involvement has to be baked into the planning process from day one. And so there are some things you can do with philanthropic giving in terms of things like funding scholarships and so on and so forth. The thing that I like to think about is, and I will not suggest that we write off the state completely, because you're doing something that hasn't been done in a while, and that's bringing in a new president. And that's an opportunity. Okay, it's an opportunity to say, we're thinking of LSU differently now. We're holding on to that wonderful, extraordinary culture of LSU, but we're going to go out there and we're going to start to think differently and put out a bold plan that is so good people simply can't refuse to support it. And you're not going to get anywhere if you keep saying the same thing all the time. And I'm not saying the institution has done that. It's done strategic planning, it's done good fundraising, but I think to go to the next level, we've got to take a step in a different direction. So part of the answer to your question is, private giving, working with the legislature, but don't count on that, right? And trying to keep tuition and fees to a level that increases, in fact, the affordability through scholarships and things like that, and leveraging the system as much as possible to make sure that we are eking out every value of every dollar that is invested. And I think that's, I saw this at the Shreveport campus yesterday, the tremendous investments that the students have made, and it's going right back into the things that support them directly, and they see that. But those are some of the actions that I think can be taken. And I will give you an example. The National Science Foundation has had its budget increase in rather nominal ways over the many years, and it's done tremendous things. It's funded 230 or more Nobel laureates and so on and so forth. But to really go to the next level, like some of the other, like the National Institutes of Health has done, we had to begin thinking of telling Congress a different story, because just saying, hey, we need more money wasn't going to cut it. So that's exactly what's happening right now, and it's actually working. And it's going to be good for America. It's going to be good for research. It's going to be good for students and student learning, educational outcomes. It's going to have a tremendous impact. But it's all about thinking bigger, challenging yourself to think bigger, and then presenting a bold, transformative plan in a way that is beneficial to people and connects to donors, connects to citizens on the street, connects to everybody. Faculty, everybody, when you say, what are we about at LSU? They'll say, here's what we're about. I'm not sure that would be the case today. And that's true for a lot of universities. So not in any way saying bad things about LSU, but everybody has to understand what the institution is about and where it's going. Because if that alignment isn't there, then you're going somewhere and you don't know the destination, nobody knows, and everybody's moving in a different direction. What happens? It just sort of disperses. So I think there's huge opportunity there. And the other thing I would just say very quickly is the fact that this is a system provides more opportunities for addressing budget challenges than if it were a single institution. And I say that not in the sense of robbing Peter to pay Paul, but to say that diversity means there's more opportunities to get different types of assistance, different types of fundraising for different campuses, different parts of the system, to where it's not just one thing that you're going after, and that builds resilience into the system overall. And that is a very important thing when you're dealing with tough budgets.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Brianna, if you have another question.
Yes. So graduate and medical students often experience a power dynamic where faculty advisors or attending physicians can make it difficult to succeed if the student is not liked. How will you ensure that a student who experiences harassment can speak up and not feel that their academic career will be in jeopardy?
Yes, indeed. Thank you for that good question. And truly, I think that exists in other places as well. And this issue of a power dynamic is certainly at the core of what harassment is about, or mistreatment of students, or this sort of, it's a behavior. It's actually a fundamentally a behavioral characteristic. So I think there are ways, for example, in terms of what we talked about, education, Title IX, those sorts of things. But at the end of the day, it's creating a culture where when individuals bring that sort of thing forward, it's not dismissed, but it's dealt with. But you want to get on the front end of that and prevent it from happening to begin with. And that means that you're helping faculty learn how to be good mentors. The fact that that kind of behavior is unacceptable, and it's unacceptable from an institutional cultural point of view. And certainly if they're mentoring students in any sort of scholarly activity, that runs completely counter to the fundamental tenets of what scholarship is about, which is respect, mutual respect, support, openness, collaboration, debate, that kind of thing. And it's just like plagiarizing a paper. If you're not exhibiting those kinds of behaviors, then you really can't be trusted, I think, as a scholar. And so when you're mentoring individuals, that is a very, very high task. And if you don't have the respect for those you're mentoring, then you're not going to be, not only are you not going to be successful, but you're really fundamentally running counter to what the fundamental tenets of scholarship are about. And so setting the high bar and holding people to it and holding them accountable through reporting and through mechanisms where people are not, and retaliation is a big deal, right? That's at the core of harassment. You have to have an environment where retaliation is not allowed and it is not accepted, and that students have a mechanism to come forward. Now, I don't know if there's, an ombudsman here, whatever, mechanisms already exist for that. But this is very, very important, because that kind of strife will kill an institution. And we've seen already some challenges that have happened that have taken a big hit on the reputation of the institution. We can come back very, very strong from that. And that's the beauty of this kind of thing. It exposes vulnerabilities, and you can't get better and get stronger unless you know what your weak points are. So this is the time to really address that important question you asked. Thank you.
Thank you.
Destiny, if you have any more questions?
Yes, I had one more. So with Alexandria being almost 100 miles away and Shreveport being even farther, just in general with all of the other universities in the LSU system that are not flagship, how would we feel supported by you if you were named president?
Yeah, great question. So I heard people use the term, satellite campus the other day. That needs to get out of the vocabulary, right? And they're using it, I get it, But at the end of the day, each of these institutions is a fundamental, integral part of the system. There are no unimportant parts, not a single unimportant part. You take one part, and let me say it this way, if you take one part away and the system is just fine, then it's not a system, right? It's not a system. So in my case, our health sciences center is 20 miles north. It might as well be, 1,000 miles north. Sometimes, like our research campus is a couple miles south. Sometimes the people could be in another state. So distance is somewhat perceptive, right? But I think it really comes down to what we talked about earlier. It's maintaining cultural identity and building trust for collaboration. And the only way you can do that is to make sure that people, at the end of the day, they see, okay, resources are not being constrained and they're not flowing in different ways because we're collaborating. In fact, they're growing. They're doing just the opposite of what one would be fearful of seeing happen. The only way you can convince people of that is to actually show it, because we're by nature, we're skeptical, right? And understandably so. So I think, looking at how we can, and again, this is a really high priority for me, how we can look at the mechanistic things that stand in the way, the cultural things that stand in the way, to really truly becoming a single system that has very, very important component parts, but we don't lose their identity by working more effectively together. And there are things like the National Cancer Institute designation that we get. It's a very, very important priority. You can't get that except for working together. So we need to have some good exemplars, and there are many out there, I think, already, but the stories aren't getting told, and I think that folks don't know about it. So we need to take those things, really learn from them, and maybe, then enculturate across the system these kinds of practices so we truly do operate as a connected whole. Thank you for the very good question.
Thank you.
Dr. Williams, do you have any more questions?
I do. So LSU graduates are highly recruited by organizations outside of our state. And while this is awesome, it's important for us to try to retain our top talent within the state of Louisiana. How can we encourage our students to stay home and develop a stronger workforce here?
Oh, that's a great question. I think it really comes to the issue of the economy, right? The job availability here. Are we providing a framework where students who graduate, for example, suppose they want to start a private company or private practice or create a studio if they're in the arts, are we providing the mechanisms as a state to do this? This is where the relationships, I think, with the legislature, with the governors, like, is LSU completely embedded in the conversation about where the state is going? And in fact, Wayne Brown is one of the board of supervisors. I had a wonderful man. I had a wonderful chance to talk with him last night, and he was this morning going to a meeting of the 100. I forget the name of the group. Of something 100. Basically, the key players in the state, including Governor Bell Edwards, to talk about economic development. And so I think looking at the issues of the state and possibility for economic diversification that can be driven in part by the fact that we are a land grant at LSU. We have extension offices that do incredible things in agriculture, but the land grant of tomorrow is really taking that ag system and keeping it very strong and building it up and making it stronger, but also building out from it. It's not a sort of a fixed pie, but building out from it in rural and remote communities, building technology, building capabilities to advance the economy in ways different, but supportive of and in consonant with the agricultural activities that has been traditionally very, very strong. So I think it's not waiting for the state to react, but being part of the driver of how the state can then react and create the culture and the environment that makes people want to stay in Louisiana versus going somewhere else. And really having the conversation of, and I've had this with people who came from MIT to Oklahoma, and we use this guy all the time to say, why did you relocate in Oklahoma? And he tells this incredible story, and there's nothing like hearing it from somebody who made the decision to either to come here or to stay here. And those stories need to get told to the legislature, to the governor, because policies have to change, support has to change, it has to follow that. And I think LSU can be a very strong driver of that, but it's got to have a very strong support and presence in the legislature and also at the federal level. So to me, federal and state governmental relations are very, very important. And I've been involved with a lot of that through my career, and I've seen the positive impact that can make.
All right. Mrs. Simonis, do you have anything else?
I do. You touched on the importance of diversity, equity, and inclusion in your previous interview. What steps would you take to ensure there is training and resources available to faculty and employees on that matter? So
one of the things I'd like to know is, first of all, what are the resources that are there now, and are they viewed as adequate? The second thing is, and I'm still learning about reporting lines, because org charts sometimes are org charts, but they don't necessarily portray how things actually work. And so my personal feeling is, and this is a conversation to have, it's not something I would come in and demand, but I think to me, the diversity, equity, and inclusion activity has to really be in the president's office, and the president himself has to be focused on that as an institutional imperative. We talked in the previous session about the fact that our student body looks really quite good in terms of diversity. It still has ways to go, but the faculty ranks are quite not what they need to be. So how does that become an institutional priority? Well, it's certainly true for the provost. She's really amazing, but also in research. I didn't find a single thing about research in the diversity roadmap. And there's a huge amount of opportunity for diversity in research. I'm not saying just studying diversity, but actually building diversity through the research process, through external funding, through bringing people in COBRA grants and in EPSCoR grants and things like. There's huge opportunities there that I don't think we're really seizing. So I would really want to understand what the fabric and the framework is here, and then understand if it's under-resourced, kind of like the Title IX office was highly under-resourced. If it's not resourced to where it needs to be, that's one key thing. But then the communication, the modeling, the cultural issues that have to attend that. Resources are one thing, but actually driving the culture change is another one. That involves communication, consistent messaging, and involvement. This is not just a president, provost, dean, whatever. It's everybody. It's faculty. It's students. Everybody is part of the diversity challenge and the diversity opportunity, I would say, as well. And so I would want to make sure that the entire institution understands where we're at, where we're going, and the importance of it, fundamentally the importance of it.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
And then
Ready?
Dr. Wilson,
Okay,
yeah.
that's fine. So and you maybe this will be an opportunity to tie some things together,
Okay.
perhaps, or it may not be, but I'll try. Okay.
Sure.
So, and I think Kim could speak to this, or I think she has, increased growth and presence of LSU Online, and so successful.
Right.
And I think there's no question that's great. But I do think that has kind of increased pressure on-campus graduate programs, right? In other words, for research-intensive faculty wanting to attract, students who maybe 10 years ago, 15, 20 years ago would have come to study with us to say, I'll at least do a master's or else maybe do a PhD. Now they're like, I can go online, I can do this, right? And so, and I think this may tie in a little bit with, thinking about them, how do they see the value of coming to campus, actively doing research, and thinking about really a broader, more inclusion into bringing students to campus to see that, and then the economic potential of, and not necessarily to LSU, but to them and the state afterwards.
Right.
Speak to that a little bit.
It's a great point, and I think it's all about having a balance. I think there are some things like Georgia Tech did an online computer science degree, and it just exploded in popularity. There are I don't know, thousands of people have taken that, and so on. They get done in something like 18 months. It costs $7,000, and they're out in the workforce, and that's really extraordinary. But those folks aren't going to do scholarly research. They're going to be doing all kinds of other things in industry. Not to say that they're not going to be creative or whatever, but it's a very fast track degree versus the more traditional degree programs we have here. So I think it's that we can you can't necessarily be all things to all people, but I think it's an opportunity to really rethink what it means to have a residential learning experience, and say that the kinds of research that require you to be in the laboratory, to be in the dance studio, to be on stage, to be in the field, those things are still extremely valuable, and solving some of the toughest problems we have today requires that sort of thing. So I think, again, it's the idea of stating who LSU is, what we're about at LSU, what are our priorities, and what uniquely we could do, like the coast of the environment, civil engineering, things like that, real interesting, challenging problems that really certainly are not amenable to online. So I think the worst thing we could do would be to butt heads and have online try to compete. It's more, how can we be complementary to where when you add the two together, 2 + 2 = 5, versus, hey, we've got this, but they're all fighting for resources, whatever. I celebrate the online. I think it's absolutely wonderful, but you cannot have it, and it certainly, there's no intention here to replace them, but you can't sort of not talk about it. You have to have these conversations and say, okay, are we really complementary? Are we making sure that this is helpful and not, sending the wrong message to people and diminishing our research capabilities on campus? Yeah, totally agree.
All right. Dr. Bang, do you have any more questions?
My only, I guess, last kind of follow-up would be, we know the enrollment cliff is coming. We have fewer students graduating. What are some ways that you see recruitment techniques and different populations of students being pursued over the next 5 to 10 years so that we maintain enrollment?
Yeah. Excuse me. Yes, and this COVID pandemic has created, it's just upended so many different things. But I think that, and I mentioned this in one of the earlier sessions, we don't know what our bench strength is in this country. I don't think we probably know it in Louisiana, in terms of those individuals who really have aspiration or capabilities of coming into university, coming into 2-year, 4-year, whatever it is, we need to find them. We need to understand where they're at. We need to go reach out to them. And frankly, a lot of times I think they just never realize that they have the capability or the opportunity because they come from economically disadvantaged areas. They come from all kinds of family situations or whatever. We assume they're going to find us. And I'm not saying we don't recruit them. Obviously, there's a lot of recruitment that happens. But I think we have to go another step to look at data, look at capabilities as folks are developing and capture them earlier on to help make sure that they are successful and that they can grow into the ability, if they don't already have it, to come and be successful at the collegiate level. So those kinds of things are important just simply because we want to make sure that everybody who wants to study, wants to have that opportunity and have their dreams fulfilled has the opportunity. And we can't just assume they're always going to find us. And I know, again, that's not the assumption that's being made, but it's one that we have to avoid making just sort of by default.
All right, we're nearing the close. So if you would just leave us some closing remarks.
Yeah. Well, I want to say a couple of things here about something that is out there with regard to climate change. Okay, if I could. This is being webcast, I believe, right? So I want to clarify some misimpression. There's I don't know what it is, it's a petition or whatever about me being a climate denier and stuff like that. I welcome that kind of comment, I really do, because we in an institution like LSU and a university, we ought to be able to ask tough questions. We ought to be able to challenge people and say, set the record straight. If I'm wrong, help me understand what the reality is, what the truth is. So this is very important because I think people have to understand what the reality really is. So I want to give you some facts here because I always speak from facts. I welcome debate, but I don't like uninformed debate. I don't like emotional opinion. I like people to speak from what is really true. So again, the question is he a climate denier? Does he deny the existence of climate change? So let me show you some things that part of the petition was that I could have, I didn't do enough to prevent us leaving the Paris Climate Agreement. The president pulled out of the climate agreement in June of 2017, which is 18 months before I went to the White House. So I think that speaks for itself. I put in as vice president for research over $1 million as VPR into the South Central Region Climate Science Center, now called the Climate Adaptation Science Center. And it involves Louisiana, it involves Mississippi, and that parlayed into $50 million of research for Louisiana, for Texas, for New Mexico, and for Oklahoma. It involved 2 Native American tribes. If I was a climate denier, I sure wouldn't be putting $1 million of research into that. Vice News article that was out there was an interview. It says, Droegemeier said he does believe climate change is occurring and that humans play a significant role in it. The Washington Examiner quoted me, climate change is happening, there's no question about it. The question is, what are we doing about it? Washington Examiner. That same article says, Droegemeier in his former roles has criticized efforts by congressional Republicans to cut funding for climate research. This is in print in an article. According to, this is another article, this is actually in the New York Times. According to several sources, this is why I was at the White House, Droegemeier played a significant role in arguing against the creation of a White House panel in 2019 that would have served as a major platform for climate denial. Absolutely true statement. Finally, Washington Post. It came as a surprise when a person was selected to lead the climate science assessment. It's a quadrennial assessment in November, because she is considered a mainstream climate scientist and does not question the seriousness of climate change like other scientists who were installed by the Trump administration to work on the issue. She accepts that human-induced climate change is happening, this is a quote now from Washington Post, and that it is a substantial physical, ecological, and economic threat. She was picked by Kelvin Droegemeier, the director of OSTP. Although a Trump appointee, Droegemeier was on the record as accepting climate change as real. I have a lot of other things that I can point to you. I reported in 2007 before I went to the White House. I co-authored a report that the National Science Board put out. It's a very big interest to Louisiana. In fact, the governor supported this. It was about hurricane science and engineering, and it was about partly looking at hurricanes under a changing climate. Are they getting stronger or whatever? I've also had a lot of conversations with Chris Dealey here, the Dean of Coastal Environment, about opportunities for addressing sea level change, sea level rise along the coast. I think there's huge funding opportunities, and Chris is a terrific scientist. You have a National Academy member in that college, and I'm very excited about what can happen with that college in the area of climate change and global change research. So I just wanted to make sure that folks knew that it's on the record in black and white that those statements that I just read to you are quotes from the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Washington Examiner. I hope that puts to rest any doubt about my position as a meteorologist on climate change. I really appreciate the opportunity to bring that forward. So thank you very much for that. Thank you. And I appreciate all of you spending time with me today. Thank you for the great work that you're doing on behalf of the students of LSU. You know, you're doing God's work, you really are. These are precious commodities and they're the future of our country, the future of the world. And you all, I've seen nothing here at LSU but passion, but undying support, service, giving of yourselves unselfishly. And it's palpable. I can see it, I can feel it, and it shows where I look here, everybody I talk to. Not to say that there aren't issues. There are issues, but together we can solve those issues. And I look forward to having the opportunity to do that with you. So thank you very much.